It is once again that time of year, the time of year when I tell you what my favorite games of the last 12 months were so that you can either purchase them or avoid them like the plague, whichever suits your fancy. This year though, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to have a Game of the Year big award, then I'm also going to name an indie Game of the Year so that they can also be recognized for any sort of outstanding work they may have done. Indie titles were, of course, still considered for the main Game of the Year. It's just sometimes indie titles are smaller, they're shorter, and it's just hard to give them full-on Game of the Year, but they still deserve recognition and some credit. That's what I aim to do, at least in this video. As usual, we are going to be giving 3 honorable mentions and then the actual award so that all these games can get some level of recognition. The first honorable mention for Indie Game of the Year goes to Cuphead. This game is absolutely phenomenal. It's a blast. Everything in it was hand-drawn and crafted in the same style as the original cartoons from the 1930s. The amount of effort and work that went into this title is insane, and if you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend it. However, because it is in a niche market, it didn't really stand out to me as a truly remarkable experience this year, though a fun one. It didn't get Game of the Year for indie titles, but it still is an absolutely fantastic game. The next honorable mention goes to a game that totally caught me by surprise and is so vast and so incredible, I'm sure that I'm going to be losing tens or dozens of hours more to it just before the end of this year. And that, of course, would be Divinity Original Sin 2. If you haven't played this, once again, I recommend it. It's an old school RPG, isometric, top-down view. It's a blast. The branching narrative is great. However, it does have some issues with the questing system. Clarity as to what you're supposed to be doing in any given instance is not its strong suit, but it is absolutely fantastic. And if you have the time to sit down and really give yourself over to it, you're in for a real treat. Third honorable mention goes to Hollow Knight. This game also took me by surprise. I did not expect to enjoy this at all, but I absolutely did. And with a Switch port coming sometime in the near future, there really is no excuse not to play this game. And that brings us to full-on Game of the Year for indie titles. And for that, I had to really think about which game stood out to me and was by far the most impressive, made the biggest impression on me. And when I think about all the games I played this year, which one really makes me say, wow. And there really is only one title that did that for me this year, and that is without a doubt Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. If you have not played this game and you have a PS4 or a PC, you are missing out. It is a technical experience like no other, with a binaural sound system that they actually have implemented to make it sound as though the voices are within your own head, to the amazing graphics and art design behind the game, all the way to the stunning performance that Melina Jorgens actually delivers. Even though she was a mere video editor when this project began, she totally came out of her shell and blew everyone away, even winning Best Performance at the Game Awards just this past weekend. And so if you haven't played this game, you absolutely owe it to yourself to experience it. And that brings us to full-on Game of the Year. Now, I don't want to detract from the indie titles that were absolutely fantastic this year. They were also in the running, and Hellblade is actually my first honorable mention for full-on Game of the Year. It's that remarkable. However, I really took into consideration the amount of hours I put into these games, which game I lost myself to more than any of the others. All of these came into play in addition to the standard things you would expect, such as quality, graphics, glitches and bugs, how polished was it, how much I would recommend spending on. All of these things come into play when we're choosing a Game of the Year. And as I said, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is my first honorable mention. The fact that it's only $30 for a roughly 7 to 8 hour experience kind of takes it out of running for the full-on Game of the Year, just because it is a shorter experience compared to some of these other titles we're going to look at. But it still is nonetheless remarkable. Now, my next honorable mention for Game of the Year is a game I was looking forward to for a long time and really wanted to be amazing, and it actually turned out to be just what I was hoping it would be. This, of course, is Assassin's Creed Origins. And this game some people didn't enjoy as much as I did, but being a fan of Egypt, of ancient Egyptian culture, Roman, Greeks, all of that, it fulfilled my hunger for exploration, allowing me to climb up pyramids and go through tombs and see mummies and loot all sorts of things. It was absolutely phenomenal. And all of these games that are in the running for Game of the Year, for most people, are big open world titles that offer you vast swaths of land to explore. Very rarely, however, do you find a game that offers you a big open world that you want to explore, that you're hungry for, that you are excited to explore, and that you'd rather explore over the main quests that they're going to throw at you. Assassin's Creed Origins offers an entire country, essentially, to explore and for you to find and run around and ride horses in. There's so much to do in this game, and it's so densely packed at the same time. It never really gets old until you have completely finished the game, which usually takes around 50 hours for most people to do. It is an incredible experience. I highly recommend it. And at $60, and with most retailers offering it on sale right now, it is a must buy. But now we're down to 2 titles, and these 2 titles are both games that stood out to me and I thought were remarkable in their own ways, and attempted in many ways to do the same thing, to offer you a big world to explore, something interesting to do, combat that was engaging, that would allow you to play the way you wanted to, and also a story that told of loss and regain all at the same time. And of course, these 2 titles are Horizon Zero Dawn and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, these are my 2 finalists for this year. This isn't to take anything away from any other games that came out this year. But these 2 games really stood out to me personally and were experiences unlike anything I expected from them. Now, Horizon Zero Dawn, of course, is a brand new franchise coming out of Guerrilla Games Studio, a studio previously known for their shooters, but it took everybody by surprise when it was initially unveiled to show Aloy fighting robotic dinosaurs, and sure enough, when it launched in February of this year, it took everybody aback, and everyone was shocked at how engaging and truly magnificent this title was. It offers you a massive world to explore, lots of characters to see, and just the fact that this is an original IP, not based on some previous entry, makes it stand out to me because I can appreciate all of the extra work that had to go into crafting this world, these characters, and the lore behind it. They didn't have a previous book of canon lore to reference and to build off of. They were just doing it from scratch, and for that reason, I give them a lot of credit. However, I do want to mention it doesn't do everything perfectly. There is a lack of depth to many of the interactions you'll find with NPCs in the world, and there are also weird rubbery faces on a lot of the NPCs. Even though the game looks phenomenal, there is a real lack of emotion in most interactions you're going to come across. The combat can also often feel more disappointing and frustrating than it is actually satisfying. Most enemies will end up being just arrow sponges, and you'll take 10 minutes to shoot the crap out of a giant behemoth of a monster, but at the end it doesn't actually feel satisfying. It just feels as though you spent 10 minutes shooting arrows at an imaginary monster. It's not actually satisfying in the same way that you would expect a game of this scale and magnitude to be. The narrative also doesn't resolve itself fully, clearly setting itself up for a sequel, as if that surprises anybody, but it does leave a little bit to be desired after you finish the main campaign. Now, they also have added in the new DLC, the Frozen Wilds, which offers a ton more gameplay and a whole new narrative section for you to experience. However, I'm not going to include that or consider it for this. I'm considering the core game of all of these titles. I'm not throwing in DLC with it. So even though that may rectify and fix a lot of the issues I just went through, it's not actually a factor in this process. And as for its competitor, we have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This game didn't surprise anybody in how magnificent it ended up being. It personally, though, surprised me. I had no connection with the Zelda franchise or series. I hadn't played any of the other games. I had no nostalgic impression or tie to this series, but it took me by the hands and the hair, dragged me into the street and whipped me around. It was fantastic, and I easily lost 70 hours in the span of just about a month playing this game, which is very, very rare for me, especially running the YouTube channel on the side. It was so easy to play, not in the sense that the gameplay mechanics didn't require effort, but that it was easy to lose myself into it for hours at a time. I remember going to class, getting back from work around 8:30, 9 p.m., sitting down on my bed, pulling out the Switch and starting to play through it. And then by the time I think, oh, I should probably get ready for bed, I set it down, look at the clock, and it's 1 in the morning. That's the type of game that Breath of the Wild is. It is so remarkably easy to lose yourself into this world. It boggles my mind, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly why it's so easy to play, easy to be lost in. It truly is remarkable, but just like Horizon Zero Dawn, it is not perfect. Breath of the Wild, of course, is a Nintendo exclusive, meaning that it's only playable on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. The one common thread with both of those consoles is that they are not very powerful devices. Even when you're playing Breath of the Wild on the Switch, the newest hardware, and you have it portable, it's going to be running at 720p, 30 FPS, and when you dock it, it'll go to about 900p and will still be chugging along at roughly 30 FPS. Unless you go into a big forest. It still doesn't perform very well. Draw distances are not very good. Luckily, the actual art design helps cover a lot of the technical restrictions in this world, and considering it is running on the Switch, it is a remarkable piece of software and game by itself, but it certainly is not a looker in the same way that, for instance, Horizon Zero Dawn is. Don't get me wrong, it's very charming and it does have moments of absolute beauty using its art style, but technically speaking, it is no marvel. The combat and the stamina mechanics are also something that many people have criticized. You have a stamina wheel that dictates pretty much everything you do in the entire world, whether you're climbing a rock or riding a horse. All of these things are dictated by the stamina and the health levels that you have. It can actually get very, very frustrating when you're going through the world and you're constantly limited, especially in the early game, by a low stamina bar. However, it actually ties into the entire design of the world itself because it makes you constantly consider the paths that you're taking, the routes. You're not taking the world for granted and thinking that you can just ride all over and do whatever you want. You're actually considering what's going on, and you have respect for the world around you because you know if you mess up, you're going to run out of stamina and fall to the ground. So I understand the design decision, but nonetheless it is frustrating, and I'm not sure if there's a way to marry those two and make it so that you can have respect for the world in the same way that you do when you have those stamina bars, and also not feel as though it's wasting your time or just being frustrating. I'm not sure if there's a way to marry that. Normally when I criticize something, I try to have a suggestion. Maybe it is the best that there is for this type of game, but nonetheless, it is frustrating. And as for combat, of course, you have weapon degradation systems built in, meaning that every weapon you use will eventually break except for the Master Sword, which will simply lose charge and then recharge, and you can continue to use it after that. However, early in the game, it is very, very frustrating when you're constantly losing the weapons that you just got, and you'll actually find yourself hoarding weapons that work really well, are high damage output, or look really good just because you don't want them to break eventually. And I think that this is something that makes sense again in the early game when they want you to be exploring, constantly looking for new weapons, giving you a reason to go out in the world and just find stuff. But once again, it's very frustrating, especially once you get later on in the game and more experienced in the world that you are exploring. And as to whether or not this could be fixed, I think there are solutions, perhaps some very expensive potion you can buy from some seller in some city, something like that. That could be a solution where you actually drink the potion and it ties it to a weapon, or maybe it's an upgrade to the weapon, something like that. But nonetheless, once again, it's very frustrating. Now, I know I just spent a good long while criticizing the two games that are the finalists for Game of the Year, but that's because I want you to understand that I'm not just blindly handing this award out. I really did consider the pros and cons of each title and which actually balances out and ends up ahead. I also considered the time I spent in them, the actual hours played. I considered if I was pulled in and engaged in the experience right as I sat down, and if it really was something that I found myself hungry to play more of. All of these things played into it. So even though I am criticizing criticizing elements of the game's design, they still are the two best games, or two of the best games that came out this year, at least in my opinion. So I don't want to take anything away from them, I'm just showing you that there was consideration behind this. But when it came down to it, and I considered which of these two games was truly remarkable and made me think, wow, that was something that I would like to wipe my memory and experience all again. That's something that is very rare in a video game, to get you to the point where you want to forget ever experiencing it and go through it again for the first time. I felt that with The Witcher 3, something I would love to wipe my mind of and experience fresh for the first time all over again. Many people felt the same way about Skyrim. Many people felt the same way about the first time they sat down at an Atari 2600. These are emotions and feelings that are very special and very important, especially when considering a game that's as loftily held as Horizon Zero Dawn and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But when it came down to it, there was only one game that really took it a step above, and that was The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This isn't gonna surprise anybody that Breath of the Wild won another Game of the Year from another YouTuber, but it is because it is just that good. Even now I can sit down and play it for another hour and a half, 2 hours easily, and even though the narrative isn't super vast and you're not going to villages and starting really intense, gritty, realistic side quests dealing with human issues and emotions, it gives you a world that you believe is real, with characters you believe are real, that are endearing, that just pull you in, and it's something that is so hard to describe. Really, all I can say is that if you haven't experienced this game, you owe it to yourself at some point, whether it's tomorrow or a year from now or 3 years from now or a decade from now, you owe it to yourself to experience this game in its entirety. But that's about it. That is my Game of the Year video for 2017. We had a ton of amazing games this year. I didn't play all of them. I didn't get to experience all of them, so I do apologize if your Game of the Year was not on this list at all. It's not that I'm saying it's bad, it's just that I'm saying I may not have completed it or felt that it was as loftily held in my own mind as these other titles. All of these games were remarkable, and they get the Lukey Poo stamp of approval, blah, blah, blah. Now, I do want to let you know, before we finish and before we go our separate paths, I do want to let you know, at the start of this coming year, 2018, we're going to be rebranding the channel slightly. The channel name is going to change. The content will, in general, stay about the same. We're going to have some extra podcasts, some extra series that go up, but all the stuff that you're subscribed for, that you know and love about the Lukey Poo channel, will remain. There's just going to be some rebranding that goes on. So if you see the channel shift and look a little different, that's why, but the core content is going to remain. So just throwing that out there, little info, public service announcement, blah, blah, blah. That's it. I'm done. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.